On today's video, I will do some heavy lifting as I work on my lean-to. These H-beams weigh over 400 pounds each, and I will be lifting them over 16 feet in the air and welding them in place. Keep watching and see how I do it. Last week, I measured the angle I need to cut to get this beam just right. I need to set the saw up to make a 5-degree cut. This is a 12-inch H-beam, so I can only cut a little more than halfway from one side. Then, we'll put the saw on the other side to finish the cut. All I do is eyeball the blade to line up with the previous cut, and I err on being long. Then I can trim as needed. Time to take this bad boy outside. Welcome. Let me explain to you what I got going on here. This beam here will be welded to this beam here about 18 feet up in the air, maybe 17, something like that. And this line here is how far my roof tin won't go all the way to here because it'll hit the tin on the siding. So I'm going to figure 30 feet from here to the other end for my tin that'll sit on my purlins that I have on this beam. So let me go to the other end and figure out where I need to cut this beam off so my roof tin fits exactly where I want it to on the other end. All right, I did some measurements on this here. And what I'll do is I want my beam to end and the tin to go a little bit further than my beam so it can drop off into my gutter. So I'm going to cut it and I'm going to move the tin this way from my mark because I don't think I want my tin all the way up against my siding. So let me turn this over and get it cut. This Evolution saw does a great job of cutting H-beams. I have tried several different ways of cutting them, like cut-off wheel or torch. Then I end up with a lot of grinding. So when I came across this saw on YouTube, I knew I had to buy one. When you start the day, you tell yourself, this beam will be in the air in no time. And then, before you know it, it's almost lunchtime and almost nothing has been completed. It's all the little things you have to do that take so much more time than you think, like prepping the ends before welding. And things like setting up a welder machine. I bought a new welding machine a few years back, and that is what I'll use to make my final welds. The leads are not very long on my new machine, so I need to pull out my old cracker box. I bought this thing back in 1987 when I was racing a car at the local circle track. I'm glad it still works. When this thing gets up in the air, I'll need a tag line to keep it under control. I'll just use this clamp to attach the line. Moment of truth. See if this thing can get up there. I've done all my prep work I can do. Time to raise it.
Well, it's hanging there. Now I gotta weld it. Kind of windy, but it is what it is.
Now, I'm no welder by any stretch of the imagination, but when the conditions are right and I have good position, I do okay. This is not one of those times. I am just going to put enough weld on here so I can take it off the hook. That way, I can use the scaffold and my MIG welder, and that gives me a lot better chance of making a passing weld.
I am no good with this stick rod in this wind. Can you pull me this way a foot? I can't do this. It's just I can't stick right overhead. I'm terrible at it.
It's getting too windy to be up on the scaffold trying to weld, so enough of that. Besides, my buddy Lowell stopped by, so he's going to help me with cutting the top off my siding. We decided to cut 36 inches off the top, then later I will just make small pieces to go around the beam after it is welded out. My hearing protection would do a better job if I would just wear it correctly. I uncovered one ear so I could hear what Lowell was saying, and I forgot to put it back over my other ear.
Got this tin back up. I'm gonna call it a day.
For as much as I was struggling the day before, taking the time to set up my new welding machine on the scaffold was well worth it. I had always planned using the MIG welder. I just wasn't ready to unhook the beam till I had some good welds started with the stick rod. We decided that it was not going to fall down, so we set it up to use just one scaffold to hold the beam, just in case. That way I could use the other scaffold for welding. After that, I felt like I had enough weld on it we could use both scaffolds. I started planning this job years ago, and I knew Lowell would come by and help when I needed some. But his time was limited, so in planning this job, I figured out I was going to do almost everything by myself. Then, about July, I asked my nephew to come by and visit me, and I asked if he could stay a while and give me a hand. I'm so glad he did. Now that we're in the middle of all this work, I can't imagine doing it alone. Time to move on to the second beam. Almost everything is just like we did on putting up the first one. This time I did a better job of measuring and how I prepped each end of the beam for welding. A little more prep work before we installed the temporary support piece, ensuring that it was level.
Still 0. All right.
Then it was time to move the scaffold, rig up the beam, and fly it up. I expected the wind to give us more trouble than it did. We were able to set down both ends fairly quick. I decided enough of that stick rod. I put on a good weld at the top of the beam. Then it was time to move over to the other end. Getting the upright plumb was a bit of a trick, but after we loosened the nuts on the bottom, it was much easier. I started welding on it, and the porosity was horrendous. So it was late in the day. I was tired. I thought about putting up a windbreak, but I'm retired. I don't want to work that hard. I'll climb back up there when I know it's not so windy and make some good clean welds. I think I'll end the video here. I hope you liked it, and I hope to see you again on the next episode of My Retired Life. So long.